You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Hope you like a little country, some rock and roll and blues, 'cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina in the performance space of the Jody Jazz Factory. Welcome, Jody Espina.
Thanks so much for having me.
First, let's talk a little bit about your musical journey.
I started playing when I was 12 years old, actually 11 with the recorder in the 6th grade. And years later, I realized that beginning was very important to my musical journey because I learned ear training with the recorder. The next year, I wanted to play saxophone in the band. We had a clarinet, and so I played clarinet. And I took to it right away. I got a sax the next year, played clarinet and sax all the way through. By 14, I knew I wanted to be a musician. At 15, I was playing gigs in Tampa, Florida, and never had a regular job again in my life. So at that time, even 14, I knew I wanted to study 2 years at University of South Florida in Tampa, classical clarinet for the discipline, although I loved jazz. That was what I loved. So, and then go to Berkeley in Boston, which I did, and I graduated Berkeley in 1983, and nothing was happening. There were no gigs. I didn't want to sit around in Boston and do nothing, so I got a rail pass and traveled through Europe, and toward the end of this long month traveling all over Europe, I went to Barcelona, and I knew some people there that taught at a music school patterned after Berkeley. And they hired me to direct the big band and teach classes, teach ensembles. So I just fell into this crazy thing. I lived 2 years in Barcelona. Taught, played all over the country with a bunch of musicians, and really I was kind of homesick. In a way, I was a little bit of a big fish in a small pond at that time. The level worldwide now has gone up so much. You can go to any city in the world and you'll find good players. At that time, there were some good players, but it was very different. So my eyes, were always, even from 14, the plan was USF, Berkeley, New York City. And so I went to New York City. In between, I went on the road with the Tommy Dorsey Band. My musical journey was pretty lucky from the teachers that I ran into all the way up. Even in Tampa when I was 13, I had a great teacher named Jody Farrell. I studied at the store with him, but he wanted to give me extra time, so he asked the owner, can he teach me at his house? So he'd give me an hour here or there. We did sax quartets. It was interesting learning to improvise with him. He had me practice my chords, scales, and arpeggios and know them up and down, but when we went to improvise, he didn't give me the chord changes. He'd give me the melody of a song, and everything else was by ear. And he really said very little. And then when I got to college in USF, really studied the chord changes. And the whole difficulty in improvisation is getting locked in to the chord changes. You feel you're trying to make all these weaving in and out of the chord changes. You're not really listening to the melodies in your head. So that's that very difficult thing with improv, being just listening to the melodies, but then also dealing with all these changing chords that are shifting every measure. The whole part is trying to lose that ego. I call it the ego. It's the checking part of checking in, like, oh, that wasn't cool, or oh, that's so-and-so's in the audience, you can't play like that, or all this stuff. Actually, I've practiced shutting that part of the brain in the closet. Kenny Werner wrote a great book called Effortless Mastery, and it's pretty much all about that.
Now, let's listen to a couple of tunes. First, Jody Espina is playing the clarinet on the song Going to Study War No More, or you may know it as Down by the Riverside, from the album Standards, along with Rob Henke on trumpet, Rolf Sturm on guitar, Jim Whitney on acoustic bass, and Scott Newman on percussion. Now, Jody is on the saxophone, playing the song Epilogue from guitarist Jackson Evans' album Song Noir, with basses Ben Wells and drummer Stuart White, and of course, Jackson Evans on guitar. Tonight, I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina. How did you get into the manufacture of mouthpieces?
After Spain, I went to New York City and pursued my dream of being a jazz musician, and of course ended up doing every musical thing you can imagine. I played all kind of gigs, everything you can imagine, from Broadway to weddings to rock gigs at CBGB's and all those clubs downtown, big bands. The way I got into manufacturing was through a fluke. I started doing this book called The Artist's Way, and it had me on this different path than I would ever have been on. It was a more creative path and going toward energy regardless of what it might bring to you financially. If it felt good, creative, fun, go for it. So through that, I met Santi Runyon, who was a mouthpiece maker. Just wanted to be around him because of his energy. And I asked him if I could study with him. It wasn't so much studying saxophone, it was just kind of hanging out with him. He had been in Chicago and played Al Capone's speakeasies, played for all famous people. He taught Charlie Parker some lessons. He's an amazing guy. So he invited me to play his 93rd birthday party, and I picked out one of his mouthpieces in his factory to play at his party. And I got to hang out with him for a few days, and I think we bonded. I got back to New York playing that mouthpiece, and I called him 3 months later and said, I can't really play the mouthpiece anymore. It's not giving me enough bottom in the sound. It's not free blowing enough. And he said, well, why don't you come back and I'll reface it for you. That's kind of customize it. So I did, and it's something that I wouldn't have done without going through this path of the artist's way and just going for things. When I did go down there, he refaced it. It played amazing. Just some things with sandpaper and a file on the same mouthpiece. Boom. And I said, I love it. And he said, well, we can make that for you, Jody, and call it Jody Jazz. So I said, thanks a lot. And I just thought I would maybe sell a few to my students. I thought the name was goofy, but I wasn't going to say anything. So people started to hear about this on the internet, on saxophone forums, and started to want to buy them. So it was a big deal to me the way he did that customization, and I had never seen that before, and it fascinated me. So I built a company, and the next several years I was in New York City, and I'd travel 7 times a year down to Louisiana, work all day in his factory, and then I'd hang out with him at night in his studio. And we would play a little bit, I'd ask questions about mouthpieces, and it was just an amazing thing. The company ended up letting me realize my true dreams that I was thinking about in doing this artist's way. So, which was traveling around the world, playing music. It was helping people. I get to donate mouthpieces to schools who can't afford them. And it allowed me also kind of financially feel confident enough to have a family. So.
What were your musical inspirations? Who or what inspired you musically?
The first thing was, we had about 6 jazz records in my house. The first one was a clear red LP, Benny Goodman with the Brussels Orchestra. And it sounded like his orchestra. The band was really good. I was playing clarinet in 7th grade, and one day I tried to hit this note that he hit on the end of a tune. It was a high G, way up. I didn't know how to do it, and I finally hit that note. I was hooked. I loved that record. I just wore it out. Early influences were so strange. It went from Benny Goodman to Boots Randolph to Ornette Coleman. I know I was listening to Cannonball and Miles and Kind of Blue, and I liked Dolphy, Eric Dolphy early on. And we had a great radio station in Tampa. It was the USF station. Played a fantastic mix of everything. So that was part of my big education musically. That was indispensable. Typical guys, but I was a rebel without a cause in a way, and I didn't want to sound like Charlie Parker because I thought everybody tried to. Of course, then I had to deal with Charlie Parker later on. Actually, when I graduated and I got to New York and I had to really get my bebop together, that's when I had to deal with Charlie Parker.
Here is an Ornette Coleman tune, Congeniality, with Ornette Coleman on the sax, Don Cherry on the cornet, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Billy Higgins on the drums. Tonight, I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina. Now, you mentioned Ornette Coleman as being an early influence.
Yeah.
He used your mouthpieces.
Yeah, it was one of the thrills of my life. I went to his apartment on, I think it's 36th Street. We hung out all day that day. So we ate soup together, we played each other's horns. He didn't even have a saxophone strap. He had something from a camera bag. I have this saxophone strap that this guy gives me, Brancher from France, he makes, and I gave that to Ornette. And he loved a couple of my metal mouthpieces, and it was so cool. He said the nicest things to me about the mouthpieces and what they did. He said, I can play faster now. We have a way of measuring mouthpieces, and the mouthpiece he was playing doesn't even measure right. It was so ill-formed, but he played a very soft reed, and you can kind of will allow some stuff. But so when you put those mouthpieces onto mine, it was like boing. And he tried to tell me his theory of music, which is so out there. It went over my head, but we sat down on a love seat. He had this really cool loft apartment. In the big room, it was set up to listen to music. 2 speakers, stereo console, and a love seat. That was it. We sat on that and we listened to some of my CDs that I was on. And at one point he goes, you should play this music where they drink beer. He was always saying the strangest things. Came down to my apartment. I had a loft in Tribeca. He said, this is like a park in here. Just everything hanging out with him was so amazing. He always dressed really sharp. He dressed like an artist, like Ornette Coleman. I asked him, did you ever do anything for money? He said, not yet.
You manufacture a mouthpiece. What goes into the manufacture of a mouthpiece? And how do mouthpieces vary?
Well, first, whenever I say I make saxophone mouthpieces, people automatically, 80% of the people say, oh, you mean the reed? And I say, no. The reed is the bamboo part, so people get confused because they think the mouthpiece, that's at the end of the saxophone and you put your mouth on it. Most people maybe think that just comes with the instrument. That's part of the instrument. But it's a variable part. So it has a bamboo reed on it that vibrates and makes a sound. If you think about in an orchestra and you think about the sound of a clarinet or you think about the sound of the flute, you can imagine that sound in your head, and from one orchestra to the next, that sound that's going to come when you have a flute player or a clarinet player playing a solo, it's going to be pretty homogeneous. It's going to be within a certain range, very similar. Then when you think about the saxophone and you think about the range of sounds that have been made through the history of the saxophone, or the history of jazz, for example, history of rock and roll, it's a wide variety of sounds. You could have the Guy Lombardo Orchestra playing Auld Lang Syne. You could have Boots Randolph playing Yakety Sax, which was the Benny Hill theme that some people know it from that. Junior Walker playing Shotgun. Coltrane playing My Favorite Things. Charlie Parker playing Bird with Strings. Beautiful sound. There's so many different sounds that people have made on a saxophone. So we can make mouthpieces that can facilitate those sounds. They can be more close to that sound that you want. If you're playing in a rock and roll band, everybody on stage has knobs. The drummer might not have knobs, but he has big sticks. And you don't have any. When I say knobs, I mean knobs that go up to 10. So they can keep turning louder, and they always do. As the set goes on, as the night goes on, they get louder and louder. On an acoustic instrument, you don't have any knobs. And a wind instrument is all your wind. So we can make a mouthpiece that can help you cut through that, play louder, but give you a good sound. The biggest thing that changes in the mouthpiece is the inside shapes. We change the way, the curve where the reed vibrates on. A lot of little different things. When you play a mouthpiece that feels good to you, I think it's like kissing your soulmate. It just feels so good. And it makes you want to play more. It makes, when the band stops, you still want to play because you love your sound and you love how it feels. And when you don't play that, it's totally the opposite. Everything is a struggle. You're fighting everything. Nothing comes out. When you get it right, that can happen. It can feel, it's like a dream.
You've described young band players coming in with their saxophone and whatever mouthpiece they got when they bought the saxophone. And then they try out one of your mouthpieces and you can see it on their face.
Yeah. And I wish I'd been taking videos of this all along and I had that reaction 1,000 times.
Up on your website.
Yeah, I love it. And they go, wow, their eyes go like this, and they look at their friends and they can't believe it. Oh man, I gotta start doing that. If people could see that, that would be the commercial in itself. There would be no need to talk. So it's a great thing. It's a great thing. And it's funny, sometimes it's the professionals who have the most trouble. They might be playing a terrible mouthpiece. They didn't go out and try a lot of things, and then they'll see it, and sometimes they won't go for it. They won't buy it, and I have to say, what are you doing? You have to learn to invest in yourself. I know when it's right, and I know when they're making a big mistake. Usually they go for it, but musicians, that's part of this artist way thing that I was talking about before. As musicians, we're conditioned not to make any money. We're conditioned to be careful, to not go for things because we're afraid. And this is breaking out of that and going for the positive energy.